She was left to die in the desert until a cowboy saved her and revealed he was a millionaire in hiding. Under the scorching sun of the high desert, the earth cracked like old pottery. The heat shimmered in the air, blurring the distant red rocks into mirages. A figure lay motionless near a dry patch of cactus, her face streaked with dust, lips cracked, wrists bound behind her back with plastic ties. Her name was Harper, though she could barely remember it now. Her throat was parched, and each breath tasted like sand. She had stopped trying to scream hours ago. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of hooves crunching gravel. She turned her head slightly, vision swimming, barely able to lift her chin. A man on horseback came into view, framed by the burning blue sky behind him. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, wearing a battered hat and a tan shirt darkened by sweat and sun. He dismounted slowly, the horse snorting as it stopped beside her. "You don't look like someone meant to be left behind," he said. His voice was low, calm, without judgment. It sounded like it had spent years wrapped in dust and silence. Harper tried to speak but coughed instead. She looked up at him, eyes narrowing with what little strength she had left. He knelt beside her, taking a long look at the bruises on her arms, the dirt on her face, the dried blood along her temple. "I'm going to cut you loose," he said, "just so you know." She didn't respond. Part of her still didn't believe he was real. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a knife, and gently cut the ties. Her wrists dropped, sore and stiff. She winced. "Easy now," he murmured, sliding one arm behind her back and the other under her legs. She tried to resist, but her limbs gave up long before her will did. He lifted her with ease and carried her to the horse, steadying her as he helped her into the saddle. She leaned forward, clinging to the horn, head swimming. "Name's Cole," he said, climbing up behind her and guiding the reins. "We're not far. You just hold on." Harper wanted to ask where or who he was, or why the hell he'd bother, but the sun was pulling her back under, and she let herself slip into blackness. When she woke again, it was to the cool press of damp cloth against her forehead. The light was dim, the smell of firewood faint. She blinked, groggy, and saw she was inside a tent or a cabin, hard to tell. The walls were canvas, stretched tight against a wooden frame. A pot simmered over a small flame nearby. Cole sat at a table, sharpening a knife. His shirt was off, hung to dry. His back bore scars, not the kind left by time, but the kind earned from violence. She stared, not sure if it was pain or safety she felt. He turned, noticing her awake. "You made it through the first nap. That's a good sign," he said, voice still level. She pushed herself up slightly, muscles screaming in protest. Where am I?" "Couple miles off the highway. Too far for you to walk back, close enough for trouble to find us if it's coming." "Who are you?" "I told you. Name's Cole. That's about all you need tonight." She didn't like that answer, but she didn't have the strength to argue. He poured her a tin cup of water and handed it to her carefully. She drank in slow, trembling gulps. "You were left tied out there to die," he said, not as a question but as fact. "Someone wanted you gone." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "I didn't see faces," she lied. Cole didn't press. He just nodded once and went back to his sharpening. The rest of the evening passed in silence. Later, when night had fully claimed the desert and only moonlight lit the canvas, Harper jolted awake from a nightmare. Cold sweat on her skin, heart pounding. She sat up fast, eyes darting. Cole was standing at the entrance of the tent, backlit by the moon, his rifle held loose in his hands. She gasped, scrambling back against the cot. He turned, quickly raising one hand. "Easy, I'm not pointing it at you." Her breathing was ragged. "Why are you holding it at all?" "Because whoever left you out there might not be finished. I don't sleep deep, especially not with strangers around." "You think they'd come back?" "They usually do, to finish what they started." She swallowed, her pulse slowing just a little. "You're not afraid of them?" "I've lived long enough not to be afraid of what I can see coming." He stepped outside, still holding the rifle, and sat on a wooden stool just outside the tent flap. A thin line of smoke rose from a smoldering fire nearby. Harper lay back down, staring at the canvas above her. The desert was silent again, but now there was a man with a gun between her and whatever shadows still hunted her, and for the first time in days she felt something strange. Not safety, not trust, but maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a second chance. The desert was unforgiving, but the man who lived in it moved with grace. Cole kept the fire small in the mornings and made coffee that tasted like burnt dirt, but warmed Harper's chest all the same, and stayed constant. A deadly watch that made it tasted like burnt dirt but warmed Harper's chest all the same. He never fussed over her injuries, never asked where the bruises came from or who had left her behind. He brought her a fresh cloth for her forehead, fed the fire, and said very little. She appreciated the silence, until she didn't. "You're not going to ask me anything?" she finally said, her voice dry but steadier than the night before. Cole was crouched near the edge of the camp, checking the saddle straps on his horse. He didn't look back. "Nope. Not even where I'm from? I figure you'll tell me when you're ready. Or you won't." She stared at him, thrown off balance by the absence of pressure. She was used to people needing things from her, answers, explanations, money, time. Cole didn't seem to need anything at all. Later that morning, she tried to help him with the firewood. She limped toward the pile he had dragged in with a half-splintered branch tucked under her arm, and he simply raised an eyebrow. "You trying to fall over again?" She scowled. "I can carry a few logs." He shrugged and let her. It was the only moment of softness he offered all day. The sun climbed higher, and Cole saddled his horse, tossing her a battered straw hat before riding out with a rope coiled over his shoulder. "Don't burn the place down," he said as he mounted up. "I'll be back before dusk." Harper sat alone for hours. She explored the edges of the camp, a canvas tent, a lean-to covered in brush and tin, a small garden of desert herbs barely clinging to life. There was no electricity, no phone, no contact with the outside world. It was like stepping back into time. She caught her reflection in a cracked mirror hanging by the water barrel. Her eyes were sunken, the corners of her mouth pale and tight. Her face had aged in the last week. No makeup, no suit, no boardroom, just raw survival. She had once been the assistant CFO of a rising tech firm, and now she was standing in the middle of nowhere, being fed canned beans by a man who seemed to belong to the land more than to any name. Cole returned as the sun began to bleed into the sky. He carried 2 rabbits, cleaned and skinned, already hanging from a stick across his shoulders. His shirt was streaked with red dust. He looked like a man from a storybook, the kind you were never sure actually existed. They ate in silence. She was the one who broke it. "I used to work in finance," she said, staring into the fire. "Private equity, mergers mostly." Cole didn't respond. She glanced up. "That surprise you?" He looked at her from across the fire, eyes shadowed by the brim of his hat. "Nope." "You don't think I look like someone who handles a $100 million fund?" "I think you look like someone who's been through hell," he said, and made it out. The words landed like a weight in her chest. "I was framed," she said after a moment. "Someone inside wanted me out. There was a fake audit, fake emails, even a burner phone planted in my office." Cole's hands didn't stop moving as he cleaned his knife. "They offered me a choice, take the fall or take the settlement and disappear." "And you didn't like either," he said. "I didn't pick either," she replied. "I ran. I figured I'd get to the press, expose the whole thing, but they were faster." He nodded slowly, as if it was a story he'd heard before, or maybe lived himself in another form. "And the desert?" he asked. "Wasn't part of the plan." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Never." She studied him for a long moment, then asked, "How long have you been out here?" He didn't answer right away. "Long enough," he finally said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting tonight." She tilted her head. "How long since you talked to someone who wasn't bleeding or running?" He met her eyes. "Long enough to forget how to trust." The fire crackled between them. She wanted to press, to dig into the calm mystery he wore like armor. But something stopped her. Instead she said, "Thank you for not leaving me there." Cole nodded once, then stood. He walked to the edge of the clearing and sat down with his back against a rock, his rifle across his knees. Same as the night before. "You always sleep like that?" she asked. "Only when there's something worth guarding." She didn't ask if he meant her, and he didn't say it. But in the stillness of the high desert night, surrounded by nothing but stars and wind, it was the first time Harper believed she might be safe enough to sleep. The first sign was the light, two small beams cutting through the distant darkness like spears of fire. Harper stood just outside the tent, cup of water in hand, when she saw them. Headlights, bouncing off uneven ground, approaching slowly from the eastern edge of the ridge. Her heart froze. She didn't speak, just turned on her heel and ran. Cole was cleaning his rifle beneath the awning of the lean-to. She skidded to a halt in front of him. "Lights," she gasped. "Two of them, coming this way." He didn't ask where, didn't ask how close. He stood instantly, all movement, all readiness. His eyes narrowed toward the horizon. Then he grabbed the rifle, his saddlebag, and moved toward the horse. "Pack nothing," he said. "We ride." Harper's voice caught. "Is it them?" He looked at her. "I'd bet my last breath it is." She didn't argue. She climbed onto the horse behind him without needing help this time, clutching his waist as he kicked the horse into a gallop. The camp disappeared behind them in a blur of shadows and dust. The wind screamed as they tore across the open land, dry brush whipping at their legs. Cole's grip was solid, his body leaning into every turn, every sharp angle between stone and sky. They entered a narrow canyon, walls rising like jagged fangs around them, moonlight striping the stone. Behind them, engines roared louder. "They've got trucks," Harper shouted over the wind. "They won't follow through this cut," Cole yelled back. "Too narrow. We've got one chance." The horse bounded up the incline toward a high plateau, hooves clattering against hard-packed stone. At the top, they could see for miles, until the gunshots cracked like thunder. The first bullet pinged off a rock just feet from them. Harper ducked. Cole turned sharply, guiding the horse behind a cluster of boulders. "We'll draw them in," he said, sliding off the saddle. "You keep down. If I fall, you ride." She grabbed his arm. "No, you're not going out there alone." His eyes met hers. "I've done it before." "That's not the point." He hesitated just for a moment. Then came the voices. "Spread out. Don't let them get to the pass." Footsteps pounded across gravel. 3 figures emerged from the lower ridge, flashlights slicing through the darkness. Cole moved like lightning. He tackled the first man before he could raise his weapon, slamming him to the ground and knocking the gun from his hand. The second aimed at Harper. She dropped flat as a shot fired, dust kicking up inches from her face. Cole turned, fists flying, a sharp elbow into the second man's gut. But the third attacker, hidden behind a rock, fired. The sound was like a whip crack. Harper screamed. He fell to one knee, clutching his shoulder. Blood poured through his fingers. The attackers hesitated, unsure, scattered by his ferocity, but Harper didn't wait. She scrambled toward Cole, dragging him behind the nearest rock face. "Stay down," he rasped. "Shut up," she hissed, pressing her hands against the wound. His shirt was soaked, and her hands were slick with blood. "You're bleeding fast. It's through and through," he said between gritted teeth. "I'll live." "You sure?" "No," he said, voice strained. "But I want to." She tore part of his shirt and wrapped it tight across his shoulder. He winced, jaw clenched, but didn't scream. Didn't even groan. "You've done this before," she whispered, fingers trembling. "Too many times." "Why?" He didn't answer. The sounds of pursuit had faded. Either the men had retreated or regrouped. She leaned into him, forehead against his. "I'm not letting you die here," she said. "Not for me." He blinked, sweat pouring down his temple. "I didn't do it for you," he murmured. "I did it because I don't run from the wrong people anymore." She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just pain, but memory, deep, quiet, and long buried. Not a drifter, not a simple man, someone who had once bled for something bigger and never stopped. "We need to move," she said, helping him to his feet. He grunted, staggered, but leaned on her only as much as he had to. They made their way deeper into the canyon, where the stone walls bent inward and the moonlight could no longer reach. Each step left a trail of blood behind them, but neither of them looked back. Not anymore. The canyon was silent, except for the wind pushing dust across the rocks. They had made it to a shallow cave, little more than a crevice in the stone, but it was enough. Cole sat slumped against the rock wall, blood seeping slowly through the makeshift bandage. Harper gathered what little gear they had salvaged: blankets, a dented canteen, and an old leather satchel Cole had thrown over the saddle in the rush. He had drifted into a shallow sleep, jaw clenched even in unconsciousness. Harper searched the satchel for more bandages, rifling through carefully folded cloth, a few coins, a metal tin of dried herbs. Then her fingers brushed something hard, wooden, square. She pulled out a small box, no bigger than a toolbox, its edges worn, the clasp slightly rusted. It looked out of place, too well crafted, too carefully kept. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, neatly arranged in linen wrapping, were paper items, none newer than a decade. There was a hand-drawn map of the region, red ink circling areas marked M, surveyed, and no access. There were faded photos, Polaroids, a few bent but still visible. One showed Cole, younger, cleaner cut, wearing a suit and standing between two older men in front of a corporate building. He looked stiff, unsmiling, a stranger in his own skin. Beneath the photos were clippings from newspapers, folded but readable. She unfolded one and froze. The headline read, "Colton Maddox declines empire, walks away from $3.20 B legacy." Her breath caught. She remembered that name. Everyone had. The Maddox Corporation was one of the biggest private landholders in the Southwest, mining, oil, and development. Rumors had swirled when the heir apparent had disappeared 6 years ago, just months before he was supposed to take over. No scandal, no arrest, just vanished. Some said he'd gone mad. Others whispered he was dead. Harper reached for the final piece in the box, a folded letter on yellowed stationery. It was addressed in soft handwriting, "For when you forget why you left." She unfolded it gently. "My son, you were not made for money, though you carry it. You were not made for control, though the world expects it. You were made for listening, for quiet, for protecting the things that do not speak. You do not need to save the world. Just don't let it kill what's soft in you." It was signed, "Love always, Mom." Harper sat back on her heels. Everything clicked into place. The way he moved, the way he never answered questions with more than 5 words, the look in his eyes when she'd mentioned corruption. He hadn't disappeared. He had chosen to stop being part of something he couldn't fix and refused to destroy himself trying. She heard a shift of movement behind her, turned. Cole was awake, barely, eyes open, watching her hold the letter. He didn't look surprised. She rose slowly, the letter still in her hand. "You're Colton Maddox." He said nothing. "You were supposed to take over Maddox Corp, but you didn't." He nodded once. "You walked away." "I walked out," he said hoarsely. "Didn't feel like a walk away." "Why?" Her voice cracked. "You could have changed everything from inside." "I tried," he said. "They told me I was too soft, that shutting down illegal drilling meant job losses, that exposing our partners would collapse the market. So you vanished?" "I stopped playing the part," he replied. "I didn't want to become the villain just because I was born into the story." She looked at him for a long time. "I thought you saved me," she whispered. "But now I think maybe you were waiting for someone to remind you who you really were." His voice was quiet. "I didn't disappear. I just stopped being part of the wrong story." Silence stretched between them, but it was not cold. It was the silence of truth. Harper gently closed the box and set it beside him. She knelt, dipped the cloth in the canteen, and pressed it gently to his temple. "Then let's write a better one," she said. And this time, he didn't turn away. Harper didn't say goodbye. She left at dawn, just as the first pale light crept across the canyon walls, casting long shadows over the sleeping desert. Cole lay still on the bedroll inside the cave, breathing steadily, his shoulder freshly dressed and his body finally at rest. She had sat beside him for an hour before the sun rose, torn between staying and leaving. She had held the wooden box in her lap, reread the letter from his mother, stared at the map that marked places where his past still whispered, and still she walked away. She didn't take the horse, just a canvas satchel with water, a knife, and the copy of a local road chart he had drawn in charcoal on parchment. She followed the ridge trail east, toward the old supply road. If she was lucky, someone would pass. If not, she would walk the 10 miles to the nearest gas station. Anger wasn't the sharpest feeling in her chest. What hurt more was the realization that Colton, hadn't trusted her with the truth, not because she was a stranger, but because he had decided that no one could understand the weight he carried, not even someone who had nearly died beside him. She reached the town of Perdido Springs by midday, sunburnt. It was a dust-worn speck of civilization, one diner, one hardware store, and a post office that hadn't been open in weeks. Inside the diner, she ordered coffee with shaking hands and asked the server about the sheriff's office. "Got a trailer out back. Sheriff Lang comes in Tuesdays and Thursdays if the truck's working." It was Saturday. Harper cursed under her breath. She pushed the coffee aside and went to the payphone by the door, dialing the nearest county office. After 15 minutes of dead tones and rerouting, she left a message, brief, clipped, and unsatisfying. A woman's voice behind her caught her attention. "They're already out there, surveying the Maddox Ridge line, got drone markers and everything." Harper turned slowly. At the next table, 2 men and a woman sat with blueprints rolled out beside their lunch tray. They wore pressed shirts, khakis, corporate badges clipped to their belts. The woman spoke again. "Next month, ground prep starts. Sooner if the old man out there doesn't file a land claim, no title, no rights." One of the men snorted. "If he's smart, he'll pack up and vanish again. No one wants trouble with the family name on the deed." Harper stepped forward before she could talk herself down. "What company do you work for?" she asked. They looked up, startled. "Ma'am?" "The project," she said, pointing to the blueprints. "Who's funding it?" The woman answered, cautious. "It's through Madeira Holdings. We're just contractors." Harper froze. Madeira was a subsidiary of Maddox Corp. They were coming for him, again. Not because they knew who he was, but because they didn't. Because they thought the desert was empty, that the land meant nothing. She turned without another word, pushing out into the street, lungs burning with more than heat. She could have kept walking. She could have turned her back, let him disappear again. It wasn't her land, it wasn't her fight, but deep in her gut she knew exactly what he would do if it were someone else. He would stand. Even if it broke him, even if it bled him dry, he would stand because that was what he did. And she wasn't going to let him do it alone. Harper found a retired rancher at the edge of town, bartered her watch for a one-way ride back toward the canyon. The truck's windows were cracked. The radio didn't work, but it ran. Dust swirled behind them as they sped west. When she arrived, the cave was empty. At first, panic flared in her chest, until she saw the footprints, one set of boots, one dragged trail. Blood droplets faded along the rocks. Cole had moved, not far, but somewhere safer. She followed the trail until it led to a shallow ravine, tucked low and shadowed, hidden from the sky. He was there, barely conscious, cradling his shoulder, breathing shallow. When he opened his eyes and saw her, he didn't speak. Neither did she. She dropped the bag beside him, knelt down and poured water into his hand. He drank it, barely, watching her like a man unsure if he was dreaming. "You came back?" he rasped. Harper's voice was steady. "Not for you." He blinked. "I came back," she said, "because you're the kind of man who wouldn't leave someone behind, and I won't either." Cole closed his eyes. A slow, pained smile crept across his face. And for the first time since the desert nearly swallowed them both, neither of them was alone. The sun was already high when the meeting began. Cole stood at the front of the old mission church, his shoulder heavily wrapped but his voice clear. Around him sat a crowd of 30, ranchers, homesteaders, old-timers with calloused hands and sun-cracked faces. Harper stood off to the side, watching every flicker of doubt, every nod of resolve. "They think this land is empty," Cole said. "They think because we live quiet we won't fight, that we'll fold, sell, vanish." He looked out at the crowd. "They're wrong." Someone near the back raised a hand. "What can we do? They've got drones, trucks, lawyers." "They've also got a clock," Harper said, stepping forward. "Madeira Holdings is moving fast because they know they're not legally entitled to drill if we delay long enough. If we can stop them from setting up within 72 hours, we buy time. Maybe enough to get a court injunction, maybe enough to get them out." An older woman crossed her arms. "And what if they don't listen?" Cole didn't blink. Then we make it impossible for them to dig. That afternoon, they got to work. Using boundary records and old survey maps, the locals marked the edges of privately owned and disputed land. They put up wire, drove wooden stakes, hung makeshift signs that read "Occupied" and "Under Review." Harper coordinated routes and rotations. Cole helped dig trenches at key entrances, slowly, one-handed, but without pause. By morning, the desert was no longer silent. 3 black trucks rolled into the valley at dawn, contractors, private security, and a man in mirrored sunglasses who stepped out like he expected to be obeyed. Harper met him halfway down the ridge. "This is private land," she said, voice firm. "You're trespassing." He sneered. "You got a title?" Cole stepped up beside her. "We've got enough. Who the hell are you?" "Someone who used to sign your paychecks," Cole said coldly. The man paled, just slightly, then laughed. "Colton Maddox, so the rumors were true." "They always are," Cole said. Eventually, tension cracked like lightning in the still morning heat. The man signaled behind him. "We've got permits. You stop us, you get sued." "We stop you," Harper said, "because we can." The first push came fast. 3 of the guards tried to drive through the east fence. Locals blocked them with pickups. The contractors tried the south side next, met by a line of people on foot, holding signs, some holding nothing but steady eyes. Then came the west ridge, unguarded, unmarked. Harper ran when she saw the figures in black weaving through the brush. She cut wide, angling across the field to draw them away. They saw her. She sprinted toward the bluff, wind tearing through her hair, heart pounding. Gunfire cracked. Cole heard it from the clearing. He ran, ignoring the screaming in his shoulder, the blood soaking through his bandage. He saw Harper stumble, trip, fall to her knees. One of the men raised a weapon. Cole didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, slamming into the man before the trigger could pull. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and dust. A shot rang out, wild. Another hand grabbed for Harper. She rolled, kicked hard, scrambled back. But then, another shot. Cole jerked back, staggered. Harper screamed. He fell to his knees, blood blooming across his chest like a crimson flower. She ran to him, dropping beside him, hands shaking. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no, stay with me." He tried to speak, but blood touched his lips. The crowd surged forward then. Locals, ranchers, even those who had hesitated before, now charging, shouting, cameras filming, sirens in the distance. The attackers scattered, retreating into the dust. But Cole stayed where he was, eyes wide, breath short, grounded in the place he had chosen as his silence. And now, the place he had bled for. Cole survived, barely. The bullet had torn through his chest, grazing the lung and fracturing a rib. It was a miracle, the old doctor said, that it had missed his heart by less than an inch. Harper never left the bedside. She sat through the fevers, the nights he groaned in pain, the moments when he whispered things from the past he never meant to say aloud. Names, regrets, places he had buried inside himself for years. She cooled his forehead, cleaned his wounds, and read to him from a tattered book she found near the old cot, poems about rivers and wild horses and faraway places where the wind didn't always sting. Sometimes he would wake, look at her and say nothing, and she would smile anyway, just to remind him she was still there. When the worst of it passed, Cole moved to the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket and surrounded by the dry scent of sagebrush and dust. Harper brought him tea with honey and told him stories, not from the boardroom, not from the wreckage she'd left behind, but stories of her mother's garden, of the old red swing she used to sit on, of the first time she ever rode a horse and fell flat on her back laughing. He laughed too, once. It sounded like something he hadn't remembered how to do until then. As his body healed, so did something else, something between them that no longer needed words or explanations. It was simply there. In the way she passed him his hat before the wind picked up, in the way he leaned closer when she read aloud, just to feel her breath on his skin. On the 7th day of healing, as the sky blushed into gold, Cole asked her to ride with him. "You sure?" Harper asked, eyeing his side. "I won't go far," he said, "just up the ridge." They rode slowly, 2 horses side by side, their shadows long against the orange hills. At the top, they dismounted, standing beneath a wind-warped tree that clung to the cliff like it had chosen to stay no matter what. Cole reached into the breast pocket of his worn shirt and pulled out a small pouch. From it, he drew a silver ring. Worn, imperfect, beautiful. The band was slightly bent, the edges dulled by time. But inside, etched in delicate script, were 7 words. Never run from love, not even if it scares you. Harper stared at the engraving, her throat tightening. It was my mother's, he said quietly. She gave it to me the night before I left. Everything. Said if I ever found a reason to stop running, I'd know. He held the ring out. I used to belong to the world, Harper, he said. The meetings, the boardrooms, the legacy. It was never mine, not really, but I took it because it was easier than choosing something real. She looked at him, eyes wide. And then I left it, he continued, voice low and steady, not because I was brave, but because I was scared of what I'd become. I didn't think I deserved to belong anywhere anymore. He stepped closer. But now, I just want to belong to you. Harper didn't speak. Not right away. Tears welled in her eyes, slow and hot, spilling silently down her cheeks. She took the ring with trembling fingers. She didn't need to ask why now, or how he knew, or what tomorrow would look like. Because in that moment, under that golden sky, she felt something she hadn't in years. Safe. Not from danger, but from being forgotten. From being let go. She slid the ring onto her finger and looked up. I'm not running either, she said. Cole's chest lifted with something deeper than breath. They leaned into each other, arms winding together as the sky darkened into dusk. Their foreheads touched, their hands pressed over one healing heart. For the first time in their long, bruised lives, they weren't surviving. They were beginning, and this time, neither of them would do it alone. A year passed. The land had changed, but only because someone had loved it enough to keep it whole. The winds still swept through the canyon, the same sun still bled gold across the rock, and the night still echoed with coyote calls. But now there was life, steady, humble, and deeply rooted. They called it Red Haven. Once it had been just a stretch of high desert Cole used to disappear from the world. Now it was a ranch with purpose. A place where kids from broken systems came to learn how to ride, to breathe, to exist without fear, where teenagers found their footing by fixing fences and brushing horses, where the quiet could heal what words never could. Harper had transformed the old lean-to into a small, open-air classroom. She taught survival skills, budgeting, and how to start a fire without burning your eyebrows off. She kept a whiteboard under the porch awning and a jar of cold lemonade by the door. Cole still moved like the desert belonged to him, though now people knew his name, not as Maddox but simply as the man who fixed saddles for free and had a gentle hand with animals that refused to trust anyone else. No one asked where he came from. They just brought their tired horses and restless sons and stayed longer than they meant to. The townspeople called him the good neighbor. And that was enough. There were no cameras, no headlines, only quiet work, honest days, and the sound of hammers building something better. One late afternoon, as the sky began its slow burn into orange, Harper stepped out of the house with a small child in her arms. The little girl, barefoot, sun-kissed, with a stubborn cowlick that refused to lay flat, laughed and reached toward the corral where Cole waited, with 2 horses saddled and ready. Is she ready for her first ride? He called out. She was born ready, Harper replied, handing their daughter over with a kiss to the forehead. Just like her dad. Cole lifted the girl onto the smaller saddle and climbed up behind her. Harper mounted her own horse and rode alongside them as they trotted out toward the ridge. They moved in silence, save for the occasional squeal of delight from the child. The wind stirred Harper's hair, tugged gently at the edge of her scarf, whispered through the grass like an old friend. At the top of the ridge, they paused. From there, Red Haven stretched below them, fences, grazing horses, a few cabins under construction for incoming staff, and a line of trees Harper had planted by hand, and beyond that, just horizon. Cole reached for her hand. They didn't need to. As the sun dipped low, casting the whole world in shades of red and amber, Harper glanced over her shoulder at the wooden archway that marked the front of the property. A new sign hung from the beam, simple, hand-carved, and worn at the edges. Red Haven, where no one's left behind. She smiled, because that was true now. Not just for the kids, not just for the horses, but for her, and for the man beside her, who once believed he belonged nowhere, and now belonged exactly here. Together they turned their horses and rode home, the wind at their backs, the sun on their shoulders, and a future they no longer had to run toward. It had already found them. Sometimes, it takes getting lost in the harshest places to find the home you never knew you needed. Cole and Harper didn't just survive the desert. They reclaimed their story, one not written by money, betrayal, or fear, but by the quiet choices that matter most. To stay, to fight for what's right, to love, even after the world has tried to convince you not to. If their journey touched something in you, if it reminded you that no one is too broken, too late, or too far gone to be found, then we invite you to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here, every tale is a reminder that hope can grow in the hardest soil, and healing often begins where you least expect it. Click subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join us for more stories that lift, heal, and linger in your heart long after the final words fade. Thank you for watching, and remember, wherever you are, someone still believes in the road that leads you home. Soul-Stirring Stories.